Is that you, Michael, in the background with the? I hear
I
some.
don't know. I got the headphones on, so I'm hearing some other noise.
I hear some
Yeah, I
people.
hear talking. They women and
I hear
women or
people
somebody
talking in the
talking about
background.
something.
All right.
I got the headphones on. My niece talking.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a TV or something.
No TV.
Yeah. So what do we tell them? Someone comes with a date today.
Hmm.
So what do
I
you?
just tell them that, listen, if we're going to, Christ has come, spiritually through his word. I'm not looking for anything literal in nature when people come with a date. It's already come. The calendar has been fulfilled.
Right.
Yeah, but they're gonna say a physical. So no matter what you share with them, there's always gonna be something. I'm pretty sure.
Well, yeah. I mean,
But
take an example. Dan today, I think, in his Q&A was talking extensively about time, about how everything is regulated by time. Time to wake up, time to go to bed, time to do
Yes.
this, and then you can, so based on that, he's looking at the pattern, the first coming of Christ versus 2033. Now, even though somebody called today asking about the 70 weeks of Daniel 9, there seemed to have been some kind of a conflict or contradiction, so he doesn't know how to explain that. So he's referring to time and then looking at all the time references, and then saying, well, the best of time paths on the calendar are focused more on 2033, more so than they were May 21, October 21, or any other date. So as far as he's concerned, it's the culmination of everything. That's the final timeline, because those dates, those sequence of dates, will not occur again for another 1,000 years. So that sounds like a pretty convincing argument. But what is wrong with that analysis?
He's still looking at the calendar in a very physical way.
Okay,
yeah,
physical
literally,
way,
yeah.
right? Because I think the one thing you want to try to share, or at least try to explain, which they probably won't, agree anyway, is that they're looking at, a reminder that everything in the Bible is parabolic. Everything is parabolic. So if you want to focus on time and then you're looking for a literal time, well, then you're missing out on the spiritual definition of time. And that's where the substance is. Anything that has to do with a literal, taking a date and then finding verses or doctrine in the Bible that is going to try to support that, you're setting aside the you're setting aside the substance, the spiritual interpretation. Brad Cohen, I haven't heard. I think from the link that Daryl posted, it sounded like some kind of a machine. Didn't even sound like a human being talking about. And I think the focus there, what they're looking at, is 70 years from 1948 to
Hmm.
2018.
And they're saying, and Israel became a state in 1948. But that's a literal. I even shared that. I said no.
Well,
I
that's the danger. That's where we have to be careful, because you don't, we I think we've talked about it to some degree. Hi,
Hey,
Donna.
Donna.
Welcome. I think we've talked about it to some degree. There is a parallel. There's always, it appears, there seems to be a parallel between the literal and the spiritual. Israel
hmm
becoming a nation in 1948. Well, just because you see that, and it's 70 years to 2018, or that you read verses in the Bible that says that once the fig tree is in leaf,
Uh-huh.
you know that summer is nigh.
And that's what's in this. Yeah.
But God is giving us two pictures, the spiritual as well as the literal. Now you can't rely, I think, on the physical. You can look at it, you can talk about it, you can consider it, but you can't rely on it. The reason is because God can use that as a test, to sway your attention to, to have your mind focus in another direction if you're not searching the Bible. Because if you're going to literalize that aspect of it, well, then what else are you not going to literalize in the Bible? And
That's right.
that's exactly what other people are doing. Because if you can take the 70 years, if you can say, oh, okay, well, 1948, that's a biblical prophecy, Israel becoming a nation, I agree, because it's very close to all the things that we're talking about, the end of the church age. But I don't know if you can use that. It doesn't really have any substance for you to share anything. Let me give you an example. I mean, if, those that are talking about 2033, well, the doctrine surrounding that is that Christ came on May 21, 2011. It's also based on God is judging the world. He first judged the church, and now he's judging the world. You see, those are not consistent with what the Bible is teaching. And if the doctrines are not biblical, well, then you can't rely on whatever date you try to attach to it.
I see. So the Word of God does say that Israel will become a nation.
I don't think it says that, in those terms. It says when
you see the fig leaf and tree, know that summer is nigh, even at the very dawn.
Right.
Right, exactly.
But the fig tree is Israel. But the question now is God talking about literal Israel or spiritual Israel? But he sets it up in order to stir controversy. I think he sets it up so that both appears to be, correct. Both appear to be in view.
Okay, well, that I don't understand. I thought it was all, I believe the Word is spiritual. I believe God is spirit and His Word is spiritual. But when I talk to someone, they said, oh, well, it says the leaf when when you see the fig tree, when you see the leaf come in, I'm not saying it per, I could go to the scripture.
When you see the fig tree.
That's Israel.
Right.
God is saying Israel becomes a state in 1948, 70 years. I said, well, 70 years, what are you basing the 70 years on? Where's the 70 years? What does it say in the Word of God? 70 years from 1948 to whatever. I mean, where did you get
It's in the language, because it says that summer is nigh, and I believe there's also some other something else that they're using within that context. They're trying to relate something about returning to the land or inheriting the land, and so when they put all of that together, and then they measure from 1948, literally from the calendar, and then to 2018, and then they try to match that with some kind of a spiritual or ceremonial day, just like Mr. Camping did, with May 21 and October 21, about the Feast of Tabernacle and all of that. But the problem is, again, I believe, is that all of that is spiritual. It's parabolic language, even though there's a shadow attached to it. The shadow could be there for a distraction, because most people
they don't realize that, when he says the fig tree coming in leaf, I believe that's the church coming into the great tribulation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, when it comes to tonight, it's the fourth gospel.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, because I was talking to someone that helped design this track, and they were saying, so that's literal. So then also where it speaks about the gates will stay open, they will not be shut, and that's an indication of God is still saving. So a lot of this is a lot of it's mixed. It has spiritual and then it's thinking physical.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you don't know which to trust. I mean, there's other language in the Bible. For example, when God says that train up a child in a way that he should go, and when he is old, he shall not depart from it. I'm sorry, Michael. Is there any possibility you might be able to shield yourself from the background noise, or?
Let me say, I can only do my best because I got the headphones. I thought
Well,
the headphones would be more than sufficient.
No, we can still
no,
hear background
no.
noise.
The headphone is for you, but the microphone is gonna pick up whatever noise is around you. So, like, if you have like maybe a room or a door that you might just pull, that might reduce the noise.
Yeah, all right, I'll catch you.
All right. Yeah, it's. Um, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, it sounds a little better now. Okay. Yeah. So the what was I saying? The spiritual versus the actual literal interpretation is something where we have to be careful. The verse that says, "Train up a child in the way that he should go. When he is old, he shall not depart from it." There's another one that says, "Spare not the rod." I'm paraphrasing. That we're not supposed to spare the rod. How do you interpret those verses if you're looking at them literally?
Yeah. Hmm.
Right? Because if you're going to literalize, if you're going to put real substance and the dates and Israel becoming a nation, the fig tree, which is supposed to be the church, well, yeah, historically it was national Israel because God, I believe, was painting a picture as to the nature of the gospel. The fulfillment of that historical parable is what's happening spiritually in the church. So that's the catch. That's the snare, I believe, where if we put our substance now in the literal,
Yeah.
the same way it was historically, well, we run the risk of not understanding what God is doing spiritually.
Hmm.
And if you're going to literalize one portion of Scripture, well,
Yeah.
you have to follow through. You have to be consistent. See, by God's grace, we can be consistent with the spiritual because the Bible supports the spiritual.
Yes.
We can find harmony, throughout the Bible. No matter where we turn, we find, as long as we keep everything in perspective and understand that God is using the, parabolic language or physical or historical language to point to something spiritual. That's why a lot of people, I think, they miss the nature of today's judgment. Even those that claim to be, they're post church groups, having been with Family Radio or E-Bible Fellowship, uh, they're missing the point, Lord willing, if they continue to focus on things that are literal. And what they do is that they say, "Oh yeah, the Bible is spiritual. We have to understand things spiritually." But yet, there's a lot of things that they literalize. One of which, talks about, the earth, the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heaven shall pass away with a great noise, the earth also and the works that are burned in shall be, that are therein shall be burned up. Well, it's very hard for people to see how those verses could be spiritual, and so they
Right.
stick to they stick to the literal. And if they stick to the literal, they see it as something happening on the very last day, a literal
Yeah.
burning of the earth and so on. But when God talks about burning and heat, He's talking about His wrath on the church.
Right. Yeah.
So unless we see that, unless we're able to, to focus on that, then we're gonna miss. We're gonna stay with the literal. And so that's the point that I was trying to make, Lord willing, is that when people are talking about these dates, all you have to do is look at the doctrines that surround the dates, and chances are the doctrines are not going to be consistent with the Bible, and that's because they are literalizing verses
Hmm.
that should be understood spiritually, and only God can give us that spiritual discernment.
Right. Amen. Yes. And like in Isaiah 60, verse 11, where it says, "Therefore thy gates shall be open continually; they shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, and their kings may be brought." And this verse here is where one of the verses where the door of salvation is still open.
Well, no, the gates, day and night, is a reference to Christ but in tribulation it's a reference to Antichrist. So, the door shall not be shut because God is redeeming the body. He is bringing back the captivity of his people, while at the same time, suppressing Babylon, or judging Babylon, keeping Babylon out of the loop, so to speak. But that's not necessarily talking about an individual salvation. That has to be harmonized with everything else. Because how do you differentiate between the tribulation and God's judgment from the church age? If you believe that God is saving individually as if it's part of the church age or part of the regular course of things, how do you separate the tribulation, the great tribulation that was to come, and God's judgment on the church? How do you separate the two?
I don't know.
Well, that's why I said, I've offered that the salvation that's in view, God is talking about, I believe, a corporate salvation. It's a salvation. See, the separation of wheat and tares is salvation.
Yes.
The redemption of the body is salvation. But the redemption of the body from what? That reminds me, again, Chris McCann talking about, the great multitude coming out of tribulation. And to this day, I think you'll find that the way that, most people are understanding it, at least from his perspective, is that the world, people that had never heard the gospel, a great multitude that are going to be coming out of tribulation. Is that what the Bible is teaching?
No.
Let's see. Hang on one second. Well, what is the Bible is teaching? Who are the ones that are coming out of tribulation?
God's people are.
God's people. You can't come out of tribulation if you were never in tribulation.
Right.
Tribulation is not on the world. Tribulation is God's wrath on his body. It's Antichrist. False prophets and false Christ shall arise with signs and wonders. That brings the church, the corporate body, wheat and tares, under judgment, under God's wrath. And then now when Christ is revealed, and God is unsealing the Bible, now the believers, they are recognizing the judgment of God, and that's salvation.
Yes.
That's coming out of Babylon. See, that salvation was also pictured, or the historical salvation was pointing to that. That was historically, the individual salvation would be a picture of the corporate salvation, the collective salvation of coming out of Babylon.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so, I know there's two sets of arguments today. You have the McCann camp talking about, God is not saving. So he's talking about, so he has in view no salvation whatsoever.
Right.
But then Darrell Lockridge is saying, oh, no, don't listen to the no salvation teachers, because God is still saving. Even though he's talking about judgment and judgment on the church, but God is still saving. Well, which one is correct?
Neither.
Neither, right?
Right.
But
Getting out of Babylon is saving you. Getting out of false gospel.
right.
No?
Coming out of Babylon, being redeemed. But then again, we don't know who these people are.
Right. Yeah.
We don't know who these people are, and so that to me, I think, is a tremendous blessing, because
Yes.
we don't have so it puts us back in a situation as if we were like, well, we don't know who God is going to save anyway. We don't know, even during the church age, you don't know who's becoming saved. The Bible says, let them both grow together until the harvest. So
Right.
you don't know who's going to become saved. So you can't you can't be certain about who's saved and who's not. Look at Family Radio prior to May 21. They wanted to put a clear divide between saved and unsaved. Well, if you don't believe May 21, that means you're unsaved. Well, you don't know the hearts of people. You don't know how many of them are there because they think that you've given them something, something, a fireproof thing from the Bible that the world is going to come to an end, so everybody's excited.
Right.
But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that, how can you know that these people have become saved?
You are not to be the one to judge the individual if they're saved or not saved. It's really up to God.
Right. So even on the individual basis, it's hard to tell who was actually saved. It's the same thing, I believe, with those that are coming out of Babylon. Uh, however, the I think you get a sense of satisfaction, Lord willing, to some degree. Although that's not, a sure thing either. Some people may agree with your doctrines. They may simply go along with what you're teaching because it sounds plausible. But are they really understanding the nature of God's judgment on the church? Are they one of God's elect that is coming out of Babylon, that is being separated from the false prophets? You see, you can't have any assurance of that either. But we can only tell from the Bible, as we understand the nature of the time, the nature of God's judgment. And if we find that, yes, we do see the difference between those that are talking literally or of a literal judgment versus those that have a spiritual judgment, in view, well, that means that they're more in line, Lord willing, with the Bible. And so that should be a source of assurance that, yes, by God's grace, I'd rather be focusing on the spiritual than to be talking about a date here and a date there, God's judgment on the world. And now we have to sit quietly for 15 years just to wait on a date because God has to come on that specific date because it follows a pattern in the Bible.
Right. Yeah.
And then when that date doesn't come, you think that people will say, "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I mean, I've been led astray. I've been misinformed." No, they're just gonna make up, a story. They're gonna come up with something. They always do.
Another date.
Either they come up with another date, or they'll tell you, well, because they become locked into that pattern of setting dates, and they feel that it's their obligation, it's their duty to talk about dates because they're reading the verses incorrectly. I believe. They're reading the verses literally. And they, even though they tell you, oh yeah, everything's spiritual. We have to understand the spiritual, but yet they make reference to dates and other types of doctrine, focusing on things that are literal.
Yes.
And if you approach them with it, if you talk about them, they'll end up doing the same thing the church does, even though they might not realize that. They'll literalize when they need to literalize. They'll spiritualize when they need to spiritualize.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Because someone gave me some places, according to this track, like in Amos 9:12 and Psalms 25. So I guess, when I read those, that Psalms 25 is salvation, but yeah.
Psalm 25.
Yeah, Psalms chapter 25.
Let me see. What verse?
Oh, the whole chapter is what he had, but I read the whole chapter. In the salvation, God's people. This is Psalm 25.
Let me see. I'm opening up the online Bible so I can look at that.
Oh yeah.
Just 1 second. My computer's. Yeah, I think I should be getting a new computer, Lord willing. Because sometimes I get so frustrated, I want to pick up my monitor, just throw it up against the wall.
Oh wow.
It's
Take
so
it easy.
it's so slow. And other times, it speeds up. So a lot of times it has to do with some of the software. All right, so Psalm 25, you said?
Yes, that's what I was told this morning. Psalm 25 and then Isaiah. And it has to do with salvation because of the track there, because it's in the track.
Is there a specific verse in that psalm that you might want to look at?
Oh, well, this I'm just going with this what I was told. I just read the whole chapter because that's what they had me put down. But at the end of the chapter, verse 22 says, "Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles."
Right.
You know, and then in 18 said, "Look upon my affliction and my pain, and forgive all my sins, and consider my enemies." For it's like it.
Right. So, but what is what was the purpose of that track?
Oh, the track that he wrote. Oh, I don't know what the purpose was. I guess he just wanted people to know that.
God is
Oh
still.
yeah, it says the end of the world is almost here. Holy God is still saving. I guess that's the basic of the track. God
Okay.
is saving.
So the
And
God
also, it's also this year the world's going to end.
is
And
that
also,
is that from the I guess the Alameda Brad
right,
Cohen?
right.
Okay. So they're looking at these verses. Look upon mine affliction and my pain, and forgive all my sins. Consider mine enemies, for they are many. Or keep my soul and deliver me. Let me not be ashamed. So in other words, God is still saving, but the
Right.
world is going to come to an end. But what I think they're overlooking, Lord willing, again, see the affliction and the pain, that's tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a
Uh-huh.
physical affliction on you, the individual,
Uh-huh.
because these verses are parabolic in nature. You know, some
Yeah.
people, after May 21 or some of these other dates, and they begin to be afflicted, and people come to them. What do you call these people that are there? See, I told you so. I told you so. And you had the wrong date. The scoffers,
Mockers,
yeah,
scorners and mockers.
scorners, scoffers, mockers, and so they think that when someone comes to them and starts to accuse them of setting wrong dates or start to disagree with their doctrine, they feel that they're suffering for the sake of God. That's the affliction that's in
I
view.
see. Yeah.
That's the pain that's in view.
Mm-hmm.
No, no, that the affliction is synonymous to tribulation. All the things that we've talked about, that at least we've offered here. Uh, okay, Donna says she has to go. Okay. All right, no problem, no problem. Have a good night. So then, so basically, be back next week. Sorry about last week. I was not very answering. Was ill. We'll be back. Okay. All right. So again, what was I saying? I think I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, that. Uh, oh.
I, we'll talk. Oh yeah, they were talking about the date setters looking at the
Oh.
affliction. The affliction and the pain is all about. That's my nephew. The affliction and the pain is what the church, the believers, go through in tribulation. Remember that verse, and I think in Revelation 6, where God says, when they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?"
Right.
So if you go back to the Psalm again, it talks about enemies. Consider mine enemies. Who are the enemies?
Yeah, consider my enemies.
Yeah, who are the enemies?
The Antichrist, the false prophets and
Yeah,
teachers.
right, right. And where do the false prophets come from?
They come from. They were part of us.
They were part of the body. Exactly.
Yes.
They were
Yes.
part of the body. But in tribulation and judgment, they are under the power of Antichrist, and so they are enemies of the eternal
Yes.
kingdom, the eternal church of God. So these are the ones that cause the falling away, the tribulation, where the cross is turned upside down. Good is evil, evil is good, because God is allowing that time to come about, and it's not easy to see that aspect of judgment, that nature of judgment, because God has to open the Bible. He has to unseal the Bible so that these verses could come alive. These verses could be seen for what they were intended to, and that is the spiritual the spiritual condition of the world in the end time. That the fact that the church, the body of Christ, the Christianity altogether is under attack. And many people, they call themselves Christians, Christianity. Many will say, how does the Bible put it? The Bible puts it, many will come in my name saying I am.
Right.
In other words, the tribulation and the falling away, the judgment, is a time when everybody is spiritual, everybody is religious. Now, you wouldn't think that, because most people tend to think that if you carry a Bible, if you're talking about Christ, well then, how can you go wrong?
Right. Yeah.
Right? That's the big deception. Many people think that they find refuge in the church, or they find refuge in the fact that they're talking about the Bible.
Right.
See, that's why I said you can't know who's saved and who's not saved. But again, by God's grace, if we understand the nature of judgment, we'll see that most people will not understand the fact that God's word is pointing to them, that they are the ones that are the object of the judgment.
Yes.
Unless God redeems them, He saves them from Babylon. And if He saves them, if He redeems someone from Babylon, that means that person would have already been saved previously.
Right. Yes.
So it's just a matter of educating them, and then showing them what kind of time we're living in, or the nature of judgment.
Right. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. By God's grace, I mean, it's very hard to discern, but that's why, again, when we study the Bible, we want to make sure we first pick up the spiritual content, the spiritual nature, because everything in the Bible is going to revolve around that. But the moment that we start setting aside or start looking at certain verses, and then let our minds begin to interpret them, well, that's where I think we might go astray.
Right. I agree. Yeah. So sometimes, sometimes we share the gospel with someone, and then after a while, then, I just pray that we all come to spiritual understanding. That's my prayer, my hope. Because some people I talk to, they don't see it all spiritually. They see it literally, and some spiritual, and it's all spiritual. The Word of God is spiritual.
Yeah.
There's earthly things. There's things that happen.
But
it's just a shadow. But where's the substance in that?
Yeah, but you see, the irony in that is that that's what they tell the church. Also, they accuse the church of that. Also. They say the church is going to literalize, or the church is looking at things literally, that the church doesn't understand things that are spiritual.
Right.
And then, or the church will maybe they'll spiritualize if they read something like, the four beasts, or the dragon with seven heads. Maybe they'll understand that, that's something that